recording the oral history of Edward Goeppinger, B Company, 17th Armored Infantry Battalion, 12th Armored Division, taking the interview at the 69th Annual Reunion of the 12th Armored Division, Saturday, the 25th of July, 2015. First, sir, I'd like to thank you for sitting down with us today. And where we start is, well, at the beginning. Tell me a little bit about where you grew up, how old you were when the war started, and how you came into the Army.
I was drafted in April 1943, inducted in Pasadena, went to basic training at Tyler, Texas. From there I went to Texas A&M under the ASDP program, and after that was closed down, I joined the 12th Armored at Camp Barkley.
So, tell me a little bit about your memories of Camp Barkley.
Terrible. A lot of rattlesnakes, and we'd be camping out, and a lot of tanks cutting across the territory. A little bit dangerous living.
So, from Camp Barkley then, up to Camp Shanks, New York, and the trip across the ocean.
Right.
Had you ever been on the ocean before?
No.
Can you tell me about your experiences?
My experience was it was 2 weeks too long. And I remember in the Empress of Australia, our transport ship, the food was terrible. A lot of limey boiled mutton and potatoes and terrible living conditions. And it was really a struggle just getting across the Atlantic.
Then, of course, to Tidworth Barracks.
Yes. Cold. Dreary. Not much fun.
So, across the Channel and into France.
Right. It was a cold, cold night, and didn't particularly like going down the ramp and being shoved off onto the LST. But the beaching of the craft was very easy, and we walked out on dry sand, so I thought that was a real plus.
So what can you tell me about your first experience in combat?
The first experience, I was assigned as a runner for Captain Ebbage, who was the platoon leader of the 1st Platoon, Company B, 17th of AIB. He had never had a platoon runner, never trained us in his position. I was never trained in my position, so we got along famously for the first few days. After about 3 or 4 days, he decided I was too big a target, and he didn't want to be around me. And I felt that he was doing more running than I was running, and I couldn't keep up with him.
A quick note for the people who are just seeing Ed sitting down. Sir, how tall are you?
6'4".
And the average height of a soldier in the Second World War was about 5'6" or 5'7", so that's where his concerns came from. Go on.
But Ebbage felt better, so he hired or put in Shorty Pretower, and he was the shortest guy in the platoon. But they immediately acquired a Jeep, and it was no longer running, it was driving. I could have worked on that position quite easily.
Yeah.
The first few days were really hectic. We arrived in Rohrbach, our first town, and my first duty was to run forward about a half mile and catch up with one of our platoons and deliver a message. So I walked down the street, a hand reached out and jerked me into the house, told me to shut up because we had a German machine gun nest in the back of the house. So I was forced to stay in the house and not make my return to Captain Ebbage at the CP. When that happened, Ebbage became worried, so he came down to see what happened. He too was jerked into the room, told to be quiet because, give all the reasons. Then Ebbage said, well, let's get out of here. Let's go back to the 17th CP. As we went up the road, just ahead of us, a wire laying crew from A Company was hand grenaded. 2 men down, 1 man still standing. Ebbage picked up 1 man, I picked up the other man, went pushing back up the hill with 1 man each over our shoulders, and delivered them to the medics. Later that evening, or actually early the following morning, as we were sleeping on the floor in this very little room, probably about 12 feet square, there were maybe 6 or 8 of us sleeping on the floor, and ka-wham! The Jerry put a round right through the building to take out a tank destroyer that was in back of the house, not of our 12th Armored Group, but another support group. They didn't have enough energy in that round to penetrate the tank, but it did have enough energy to bust through 2 walls, and none of us were injured. Just amazing, amazing. So the next day, as we made our assault on the German barracks, we had several other rare occurrences. One was that while we were making the assault, our own tanks started to fire. They thought we were Germans retreating. They were off on our flank, and they were firing, and all of a sudden shouts went out, "Ceasefire, ceasefire." So that was all quieted down, but they took out 4 men, which was really tragic. After that, we were on an assault, and the Germans pinned us down in the late afternoon, and we had not taken any night clothing or heavy clothing, so we're out in the open, just in our regular GI woolen clothes, and we had to sit out there all night long in whatever foxholes we could dig through the icy crust of the ground. About a quarter of the company got frostbite that night and were evacuated. The rest of us had a real need for snowpacks, the insulated boots, which were brought to us immediately the next day because Captain Ebbage made the command that if we didn't have the boots by a certain time, we're going to go pull back. The next day we were still trudging through snow, and finally got to the town of Singling. And as we read over some of the past history, this was sort of a critical crossroad area that the Germans were trying to retain without telegraphing the fact that they were getting ready for the big strike of the Battle of the Bulge. At the time the Bulge took place, we were possibly the closest armored division to the Bulge. But in going into the town of Rohrbach, we replaced portions of the 4th Armored Infantry rather, and they had gone east. But when Patton had the word of the people that were stalled out in Bastogne, they were given the orders to make the recovery of the troops in Bastogne. So we were lucky enough not to be assigned to that particular assignment. After we had that little episode, we next moved towards Haguenau, and we were stationed there several times during the war, once before and once after Herlesheim. So we were again facing off against the German frontier, not knowing where the Germans were going to strike, not knowing what the issues were with the oncoming battle of Operation Nordwind. At that time, we did not know what was ahead of us until we started to read our own history in the history books. But at that time, we moved forward to the area of Weiersheim and Herlisheim. I had the fortune or misfortune of being given the assignment, since I was a radio operator, to stay with your vehicle. We will need people to carry supplies to the front lines. I got the call about close to midnight, I guess. Take a load of ammunition up to Herlisheim. Had no idea what the conditions were up there, and only given a rather general direction. Out there where you see the flashes of our artillery landing in the woods, head in that direction and you'll find our people. Well, this is not much fun in the middle of the night with nothing but a driver, and I was standing in the tanks, or rather the half-tracks command circle. Obviously, a 50 caliber machine gun would do no good with people that might take pot shots at you at a larger distance. We got up there, unloaded. Our people were ready to receive the stuff. They unloaded it. And we later learned that what we were really doing was trying to deliver additional radios to the 17th headquarters that was boxed up in Herlisheim. The timing seemed to be off. There was no reason for us to go up there with radios, because battalion headquarters had already put a couple rounds through their radios before their capture. So from my standpoint, the trip was unnecessary. But then in later years, I wondered, why didn't they take pot shots at us with the 88s? Because we were right in the shooting gallery. And I later figured out why I think they did not take shots. They had a forward observer 100 or 200 yards in front of our lines, and they knew their men were closing in on our people. So they held off taking shots to the vehicle, knowing that they could capture all the stuff that we were delivering to the front lines. We put the gas pedal to the metal, got out of there as fast as we could, and all of our guys that were helping unload and picking up the ammunition for distribution captured. Some of the guys who were captured wondered why I was not in the crowd. And just by a matter of minutes, I was out of there and back to Weiersheim. Pretty lucky guy. The rest of my squad, they made the entry into Herlisheim, and before the battalion headquarters was captured, Captain Nebbage had the sensing there were too many people congregating in one location. He pulled out and formed another sort of defensive line behind the battalion headquarters. When the battalion was captured, Ebbage and the guys from my squad exited and headed back towards Weiersheim. But they were in the thick of it, and with all the luck that I needed, I missed all of that. Where do we go from there?
Well, let's see. Directly after Battle of Herlisheim, the division is re-outfitted in time to serve in Colmar.
Well, part of the outfitting was when we were located right against the Rhine River at a town by the name of Bruch-Wickersheim. I believe I have that right. And the night before we were to pull out for Colmar, our resupply of personnel and a new officer came to our location about midnight. About 6 o'clock in the morning, we loaded up in the vehicles, formed a column of vehicles to pull out of town, and the Jerry spotted us just across the Rhine. And our newly minted lieutenant had joined us, was sitting on top of the gun ring in the half-track. The Jerry lobbed a mortar shell pretty close to the vehicle. Gave him a little shrapnel in the back. So after having served from midnight till about 6 o'clock in the morning, his total service, he was wounded, Purple Heart, battle star, evacuation. That was his whole career. So from there it was on down to the Colmar area. And when we reached Colmar for the first time, we saw motion picture cameras, the newsreel. We thought, oh, this must be big. And sure enough, we saw the French coming into town, and we were coming into town. They started to celebrate. We had a mission. We just kept going. And we went back to where the French had been, but they apparently swung around all the major towns and places of resistance. Going into the second Herrlisheim pre-Colmar, we were able to mount our attack early in the morning. We had snow overnight. Things were bitter cold, snow on the ground. When we made our turn off the main highway to go into second Herrlisheim, the lead tank was shot right at the overcrossing of the railroad track. And the Jerrys had zeroed in on all the key points with their mortars and artillery fire. Unfortunately, they caught our whole battalion off of the road, out in the flat, cold morning. Our own tank stuck at the railroad overcrossing, and no way to get around other than going over the tracks. There was already a line for machine gun fire right down the tracks. And we took heavy casualties at that point. We found out that we were also being ambushed from the rear by snipers, as well as trying to face an impossible attack over the railroad tracks and into the town. So we were sitting ducks, and for our platoon, second Herrlisheim was actually more deadly than the first Herrlisheim, as deadly as it was. Fortunately, the town was quieted rather quickly after we got into the initial buildings, because one of our tank units sensed the mess that we had in the main battlefield, and they went around to a side entrance and started to clear the town immediately. After that, we had a respite for a short time in a sanatorium. And that was a time when we were running patrols back through the Vosges Mountains looking for straggling elements of the German forces. We suddenly had a command, load up and move out in 10 minutes. Well, half our people were out on patrol, and half of them were sitting at the second floor of this building, cleaning their rifles and parts all over the place. 10 minutes, you're moving out. Whatever's in the vehicle moves out. Whatever stays behind, stays behind. So we made that pull out, and that's apparently when we had the instructions that we were going to join the Third Army. We spent a few days recouping our senses and getting our stuff together, and slowly moving up towards the north, towards Bisch and some of those towns, and swinging around what used to be the point of the bulge and heading up towards Trier. Pretty much uneventful getting up there, But as soon as we got up there and had the word where we were going and how we were going to get there, it started one of the most hectic times of my memory of the entire war. It was night and day, night and day, night and day. There was no stopping, no sleep. If you slept at all, it was either standing up or curled up on top of the other 9 men in the half-track, which isn't much sleep at all. But there were battles going on at night, in the daytime, and it was hard to save up your energy and your focus long enough to keep mentally alert and have the urge and the power to go after the Germans. When we got to the Rhine, we made a turn south towards Ludwigshafen in hopes that we could be one of the groups that would cut off some of the bridges across the Rhine. That did not happen, but in doing so, we closed off most all of the possible escape routes. In doing that, we almost made 100% close to our previous position in the Hagenau area. So we literally circled the entire Battle of the Bulge. By the time we got back to where we had originally hit the Rhine River, they had put the bridge across. All the brass was out there. And I've tried to figure out the timing, but I think we must have been perhaps the first full division that crossed the bridge. I think they put different specialty elements like anti-aircraft and some other small infantry groups across. But I think we were the first full division that went across. When we got across, we had a rest. We stopped for at least an overnight stay. And at that point, we were ready to start our strike to the east. We had 2 major encounters, one in Boxburg, which was on a Good Friday afternoon, and we almost got tied up in that town. And our particular platoon had a major, almost one-on-one type close quarter combat. Fortunately, we won out on that situation, but it was a very difficult situation. And we managed to flush out a field general of the German army. I think that was perhaps the first one that we had turned in. The following Sunday, Easter Sunday, we had made an approach to a town. To this day, we don't know the name of it because we didn't enter on the main streets. We came in sort of the back door through a wooded area, and as soon as we got into the wooded area, we faced anti-tank fire. The vehicle right ahead of me was knocked out, and we backed up to get out of range, and of course with a vehicle smoking, a perfect target. And sure enough, a German aircraft spotted that. They started to load up and came in with aerial bombs. I was in a house with my squad, and as we were running down the steps, I was the last one down the steps, and the Germans, put the bomb right outside the wall where I was standing. The bomb disintegrated the block wall, pushed all the troops ahead of me down into the basement where they were safe. I was headed down the basement in a horizontal position, head first, for a block wall. The compression of the explosion in the basement created such pressure that it reversed out and blew me back out. The people were in the basement, they did not experience that. They were safe. But I got blown back up just before the rest of this 3-story house collapsed. The bomb took out about a half or 2/3 of the 3-story house. I was the closest one to it. There were 2 other 12th Armored guys that were injured out in the field, maybe 30 yards, 40 yards away. And as I came out of my deep sleep, I don't know how long I was laying there, had to be at least 5 minutes. I looked up, blue sky, Easter, blue sky. I must be in heaven. I made it. And then they started to come to, and I thought it's so peaceful and quiet. What I didn't realize, eardrums were popped. And then I started to think, this may be the beginning of a counterattack. Unfortunately, I was right, but it wasn't right away. I had enough time to get out of there, and the whole platoon was ready to leave, and as we left, we were literally chased out of the town. We're still looking for a name to put on that town. After that episode, we went up towards Würzburg, made the turn, everyone heading south. And as we traced some of our paths, we found out that we were actually making circles, literally burning up time while other units were coming across, and we could go south through central Germany, almost like abreast. And they didn't want us to get out ahead because it would take too much of the brunt of the damage of the Germans defending their country. So from there on out, it was, again, a night and day situation. I don't think we had more than 1 or 2 times we stopped for more than one night at any one spot. And if we could clear a house or a town without blowing it up before we got in there, we were looking forward to a good night's rest. So as we took towns, usually 2, 3, 4 towns in a day, towards the end of the day, the word would go out, let's try to save this town, we'll stay here. But the ground rules we had with our tank support, we had an attack team. And within this attack team, the understanding was if we get a shot out of the city, we'll lower it, level it. If we don't get a shot out of the city, we'll save it so we can stay here tonight. So that was almost like a game. And it was almost the point of being routine. We were getting pretty good at trying to save a town where we could maybe get a good night's sleep. But that went on until we worked our way down through the Dinkelsbühl and Fuchswagen and some of those other places. The war period ended up for me as being a rather stimulating time. A lot of new things, a lot of action. We were south of the Inn River at the time that the war was beginning to wind up, and everyone was saying, if you can only live through another couple days, need a couple more days. At that time, my big mantra was, I hope I can live to the age 20. And my birthday was April 19th, to reach the age 20. And I did make it, but I had those last few weeks, and don't let it happen the last week of the war. We still took casualties. In fact, we had a casualty of the tank in front of us on the day that we turned around to return to central Germany. Part of our routine when we went into some of the camps where the Germans were holding their workforce, we really didn't know what we were going into. And we would run in and would see this, Arbeit, something free. We turned around, took off, because we were out not to see the prisoners and the people that were surviving, but to chase the people that caused all this. part of the bounty that we did recover that we thought was a plus was the surrounding and the coordination of the capture of von Braun. During my professional career, I crossed a man that was under von Braun, an expert in liquid fuels for rockets. And he told me how difficult it was for them to surrender. He said, you guys with the tanks, we were afraid to take our vehicle out of the woods or out of cover for fear you'd just blast us to pieces. So I said, we wanted to surrender, but your forces were so overwhelming and so bountiful. Every place we would go, we'd see American tanks. So that's what we think helped the successful surrender and the preservation of the von Braun work team, which incidentally, I worked with some of the experts in that field in my professional life and became very good friends of them.
Now tell us about your professional life after the war. What did you do?
Well, I continued my education by going to University of Basel, Switzerland, under the government auspices, which was very nice, a nice way of sort of blending down into civilian life. Then I went back to Pasadena JC. From there I went to UCLA, and from UCLA, since I didn't have a senior engineering class ready to go, I went to Cal Berkeley. But through all the different pieces of education, I think I got through in less than 4 years, and I had almost enough credits for the master's degree.
And what kind of work did you do after you graduated?
Well, it's almost like going back into the Army. I was working for a company that I was a seventh man in the company. We grew to about like 800 employees worldwide, and a major aerospace company, Barnes Incorporated. And I was designing, selling, making contacts with virtually all government contractors, and it's sort of a high-tech company. So it was a very interesting career. And probably the thing that I would boast about, for which there are no medals, when we walked up the gangplank in New York with the B Company, 250 men. Of those 250 men that came back on their feet without being killed, wounded, captured, we think we counted somewhere between 5 and 10. And during that time, to support the 250 man status of force, we used up about 600 men, including all the replacements. So being one of the half dozen or so, no medals, but great thanks.
Well, sir, I want to thank you for agreeing to sit down with us today.
It was a pleasure.